The Hells Angels have lived and breathed violence for decades, carving out their name in blood and fear. But behind their legendary reputation lies a war that has cost more than just lives. It's shattered everything they've fought for. And this war didn't happen once. It keeps happening every time an enemy tries to take over. Just when they think they've conquered their enemies, a new, even more dangerous threat emerges. It's never ending. But here are some of the most dangerous enemies of the Hells Angels. The Red Light Area War, 2015. In northern Germany, the Hells Angels were facing a new challenge in Hamburg, a city known for its red light district and wild nightlife. Their rival were none other than the Mongols, a gang with roots in California. With over 600 members, the Mongols had been clashing with the Hells Angels for years, but now they were making their move in Germany, ready to take on the legendary bikers on their own turf. But this time, Mongols rolled into Hamburg and took over the Reeperbahn, a street that had been under the Hells Angels' control for years. They walked right into enemy territory in full club gear to send the clear message that they were there to take charge. The Hells Angels certainly took it that way. The retaliation came fast and furious. They targeted the Mongols' president, Erkin Uzun, attacking him and making off with his precious biker jacket from his home. Not long after, this jacket popped up on Facebook, worn by a transsexual man. It was disrespectful, a straight call for battle. As one Mongol member put it, if someone disrespected their vest, they had no problem showing them the consequences. If you devalue the vest, you should be prepared to face the ultimate price. Uzun, furious, used social media to send a message back to the Hells Angels. You've messed with the wrong people. And December 2015, Uzun was arrested on weapons charges, but his gang wasn't backing down. They regrouped and got reinforcements from Switzerland. Now the Reeperbahn was about to become ground zero for what could be a bloody battle. After Christmas, the Mongols returned this time, showing up in full force, proudly wearing their jackets in Hells Angels turf. The Hells Angels didn't waste any time. They jumped into action, outnumbering the Mongols and launching a violent attack. But somehow 3 Mongols managed to escape, scrambling into a cab that was waiting for them. Hells Angels chased the cab down, and one of the Hells Angels pulled out a gun and started firing, 7 shots to be exact, aimed at the fleeing cab. The bullets ripped through the car, shattering windows. 2 of the Mongols were hit. Alex M., a young member, took a bullet in the back. Another, Hedy K., was grazed by a ricochet. But Kevin, a supporter from Switzerland, escaped unharmed. The police arrived quickly, arresting 12 Hells Angels who were nearby, but the shooter slipped away into the shadows. And that wasn't even the end of the struggle. It had only just target. The next target was none other Arash Ruja, the last standing leader of the Mongols. One night, he was sitting at home with his wife, ready to relax and watch some TV. But as soon as they stepped out onto the balcony for a smoke, a man appeared from behind, slapped a hand over his wife's mouth, and pressed a gun to her stomach. Then he turned the gun on Arash, firing 12 or 13 shots. The shooter's face was covered, but Arash noticed something. The man's eyes were pale blue. Miraculously, both Arash and his wife survived, though they were seriously wounded. The authorities, now fully aware of the danger, cracked down hard on the biker gangs. Key members of the Mongols were taken into custody, and by 2016, the Mongols were disbanded. But even behind bars, Arash didn't back down. Before his imprisonment, he made it crystal clear, if they're going to shoot my wife and me in my own house, they've started something that they can't finish. Whoever plays with fire is going to get burned. But that's not the only place these rivals of the Hells Angels had a confrontation in. River Run Riot. On April 27, 2002, Laughlin, Nevada, a small town just south of Vegas, became the scene of a violent clash between the Hells Angels and the Mongols' motorcycle gangs. The whole thing went down during the Laughlin River Run, an event that drew about 100,000 bikers to this usually quiet town of around 8,000. Laughlin isn't exactly known for violence, but when you throw 2 rival biker gangs into the mix, things are bound to get messy. The Mongols, mostly a Hispanic group, and the Hells Angels, made up entirely of white riders, had a history that stretched back decades. The big issue? A patch. The Mongols had fought and won the right to wear California on their jackets, which just added fuel to the fire of their rivalry with the Angels. By 2002, the Mongols were dominating Southern California with almost 40 chapters, while the Hells Angels had just 5. They were a younger crowd, less experienced on the bikes, but they had something to prove. The Hells Angels, on the other hand, were older, more experienced, and had been around longer. Both groups had separate hotels in Laughlin, Hells Angels at the Flamingo Hilton, Mongols at Harrah's, but the tension was already high. It all started on the night of April 26th, when the Mongols entered the Flamingo Hilton Casino and just stood there, staring down the Hells Angels. It was more of a power move than anything, trying to get a rise out of the Angels. The Hells Angels, trying to keep their cool and maintain their tough guy image, didn't respond. But the silence didn't go unnoticed, and it just made the Mongols seem like the bolder group. The cops, who were already short-staffed because of budget cuts, were barely able to keep an eye on things. They had only 2 officers working the river run, so it was a recipe for disaster. By 2 a.m. on the 27th, a Mongol bumped into a Hells Angel at Harrah's, and it was clear this wasn't going to end peacefully. That's when the Hells Angels decided to make their move. They rallied up and rode over to Harrah's, ready to confront the Mongols. It wasn't long before the fight broke out. The security footage tells the story. The Angels stormed in, and the first shot was fired by Raymond Ray Folks, a sergeant-at-arms for the Hells Angels. What followed were guns, wrenches, hammers, and knives. Everything was used as a weapon. Tourists tried to take cover under tables, and others hid behind slot machines. One guy, bleeding from a gunshot, tried to shield his club's colors from being seen. Meanwhile, a Hells Angel named Cal Schaefer was seen swinging a hammer at 2 Mongols, then pulling out a handgun and firing it into the madness. As the fight escalated, people were getting hurt left and right. Rodney Cox, a Hells Angel armed with a crescent wrench, went after anyone who got too close to his friends, literally smashing a Mongol in the head with it. Meanwhile, Mongol leader Roger Pinney was surrounded, forced to his knees, and punched in the face. Another Hells Angel, James Hannigan, grabbed Pinney by his long hair and stabbed him in the chest twice before moving on to another Mongol, Benjamin Lever, and stabbing him too. It wasn't until Schaefer shot Lever that the madness started to slow down. When it was all over, 3 people were dead: Mongol Anthony Barrera and Hells Angels Jeremy Bell and Robert Tumulty. The Hells Angels didn't back down though. Not one of them took off their club's colors, those leather jackets that signified their loyalty. The Mongols, however, did everything they could to hide their identities, shoving their vests into garbage cans and air vents. The police arrived after the fact and found the casino floor littered with weapons: 14 guns, 107 knives, 2 hammers, 2 wrenches, and 9 flashlights. No charges were filed by the first anniversary of the riot, and there was a lot of back and forth between state and federal authorities. In the end, the case dragged on for years. Eventually, the FBI stepped in, leading to the arrest of 51 Hells Angels in 2003. 7 Hells Angels and 6 Mongols were eventually convicted, but that's all, just 6 and 7. The Satudaras. Duisburg, right after Berlin, is one of the most hotly contested biker hotspots in Germany. The city's red light district has become the backdrop for a war between some of the most notorious biker gangs. Among them are the Satudara MC, founded in 1990 in Moordrecht, in a small town in the Netherlands. It's a multi-ethnic gang, made up of mostly Moluccan, Dutch, and Surinamese members. Their motto is simple: Satudara, which means one blood in Indonesian. But behind this bond are men involved in drug trafficking, extortion, arms smuggling, and violent crimes. While Satudara began in the Netherlands, it didn't stop there. The club spread like wildfire, with chapters popping up in Europe, North America, Asia, and even Australia. It soon became one of the dominant outlaw motorcycle clubs in Northern Europe. But whenever you have power, you've got rivals. And Satudara didn't shy away from conflict. They clashed violently with other powerful motorcycle clubs, particularly the Hells Angels and the Bandidos. In Germany and Belgium, the battle for territory got brutal. The streets were no longer just a place to ride. They became the setting for turf wars that escalated into violent brawls and murders. Back in 2012, the Satudaras decided to expand their operations into Germany, setting up shop in Duisburg. And with them came Ali Osman, or the Godfather, as he came to be known. He was named the president of the German chapter by the Dutch leaders, and that's when all hell broke loose. Immediately, the Satudaras found themselves at war with the Hells Angels. The clashes were brutal: brawls, gunfire, and knives in the streets, and it didn't stop there. Once, a grenade went off at the Hells Angels clubhouse in Duisburg, while another blast shook their betting office. Despite all the violence and the power he had, Ali Osman made an unexpected decision. He turned state's witness. Now mind you, Ali Osman wasn't alone in this. He had Christian J by his side. Christian was later revealed to be an informant as well, but at the time, nobody saw it coming. The Satudaras, who preached a code of brotherhood and freedom, had some pretty strict and frankly bizarre rules. If you wanted out of the club, you had to pay 5,000 euros. If you drank without permission, you'd get fined 100 euros. And the new guys, what they called prospects, had to clean the clubhouse. As for Ali Osman and Christian J, things didn't go well. They got arrested for drug trafficking and for smuggling a stash of weapons, including a Kalashnikov and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. But even with all that dirt on them, Ali Osman's deal with the authorities only earned him 6 years in prison. Christian J, however, got off easy with just 2 years on probation. Their cooperation didn't go unnoticed, though. The government took swift action and banned the Satudaras in May 2015. By 2018, the Netherlands, where it all started, took similar action and banned Satudara nationwide. The court ruled that the club was a serious threat to public order. This ban didn't just target the club itself, but also its affiliated groups, including Support Crew 999 and Saudara. Yet the internal issues weren't just about the law. Satudara was facing growing tension from within. Leadership fights, power struggles, and increased violence started to eat away at the club's foundation. Members couldn't always agree on who was in charge, and it caused fractures within the organization. But Germany isn't the only place these gangs bring hell over. Even Canada isn't safe. The Rock Machine. The Quebec Biker War. It wasn't just a fight between two motorcycle gangs, it was a full-blown battle for control of Montreal's streets, and it dragged the city into a world of violence, terror, and death. From 1994 to 2002, Montreal became the battleground between the Hells Angels and the Rock Machine, a turf war that left 162 people dead, countless more wounded, and shattered lives across the city. It all started when the Hells Angels, long a dominant force in Montreal, tried to take full control of the drug market. They gave the Rock Machine an ultimatum. Either they played ball or there would be consequences. The Rock Machine, led by Salvatore Cazzetta, refused and a turf war started. And then came the attacks, bombings, and brutal retaliation that turned the city into a war zone. At one point, there were 84 bombings and 130 cases of arson, each more terrifying than the last. Innocent people were caught in the crossfire. One of the most tragic incidents was the death of 11-year-old Daniel Desrochers, who was killed by shrapnel from a bomb intended for a drug dealer. The Hells Angels weren't just a ragtag group of criminals. They were a well-oiled machine, a powerful network with wealth, organization, and connections that stretched far beyond Canada. They had been around since the late 70s, and by the early 90s, they were back at the top, with Maurice Mom Boucher at the helm. Boucher was no rookie. A former white supremacist and ex-convict, he joined the Hells Angels and quickly rose through the ranks. He wasn't afraid to do what it took to maintain power, including making deals with the mafia and striking fear into anyone who stood in his way. On the other side was Salvatore Cazzetta, the founder of the Rock Machine. He had his own vision, one that didn't involve bending the knee to the Hells Angels. But unlike the Hells Angels, the Rock Machine had less funding and fewer resources, so they turned to the mafia and other gangs for support. They even brought in the bandidos from the US, trying to expand the war across borders. The violence that followed was like nothing Montreal had ever seen. Bombs, shootings, and arson were used as weapons in a war that didn't just target rival gangsters, but anyone caught in the crossfire. Over 80 bombs were planted throughout the city, some in public places, others outside bars and clubs, with the hope of wiping out anyone who dared to resist the Hells Angels' control. What made this war even more tragic were the innocent bystanders. A lot of them had nothing to do with the gangs, but they still paid the price. As the violence spiraled out of control, the police struggled to catch up. The bikers were smart, they were always one step ahead. It took years of careful surveillance, wiretaps, and undercover operations for law enforcement to even get close to bringing the main players down. But despite their efforts, it wasn't until 2001 that things started to go down for the Hells Angels, thanks in large part to a former member of their own club, Danny Kane. Kane, a disgruntled insider, became an informant and gave authorities the information they needed to begin cracking down on the gang. The war finally came to an end when Maurice Boucher, the leader of the Hells Angels in Quebec, was convicted in 2002 for the murders of 2 prison guards, though it wasn't without a fight. Boucher had been acquitted once before, but this time he was sentenced to life in prison, ending his reign of terror. But even with the arrests and convictions, the war's legacy didn't just vanish. Montreal was forever changed by those dark years. The bikers, still active and organized, continued to exert their influence over the city's criminal underworld for years to come. United Tribunes. The Hells Angels in Germany have been involved in everything from drug trafficking and extortion to weapons trading. Known for their strong biker culture and strict hierarchy, they've dominated Germany's criminal underworld for decades. Their reach is vast, and they've made a name for themselves in the underworld, but they're not without their rivals. There's the new blood, younger, bolder, and ready to challenge the old guard. It's none other than the United Tribunes, a group founded in 2004 by Almir Kulam, a Bosnian Civil War refugee. Unlike traditional biker gangs, the United Tribunes don't even ride motorcycles. Instead, they adopt the biker aesthetic, proudly wearing the patches and symbols of a biker gang, but without the bikes. Their members are mainly immigrant youths, hungry to prove themselves in the criminal world, and they're willing to use extreme violence to do so. They've quickly gained a reputation for serious criminal activity, including human trafficking, attempted homicides, and brutal confrontations. One of these new players put it bluntly: "I've broken almost every law except rape," making it clear that these groups don't follow the usual codes and will stop at nothing to take control. But the Hells Angels aren't exactly scared of these new threats either. One member said it best: "I don't think I have anyone to fear, but I have been feared." Now let's talk about Leipzig. This city, right on the border of East Germany and close to the Czech Republic, has become ground zero for a fierce turf war. On one side, the veterans, the Hells Angels, led by a powerhouse figure in East Germany, Marcus M. On the other, the United Tribunes, a new gang that's causing waves, made up mostly of young men from immigrant backgrounds. In the summer of 2016, the United Tribunes made a bold statement in Leipzig. Almost 200 of them gathered in the city, and they weren't there to just hang out. They were making it clear that Leipzig was their city now. They didn't even need bikes to prove it. They just showed up, dressed in their rock-inspired gear and acting like they owned the place. The whole thing was staged as a funeral march for one of their own, Vassal A, who had been shot by the Hells Angels. A march for a dead man is one thing, but poking the Hells Angels in the process, that's a recipe for disaster. And sure enough, things took a violent turn. The Hells Angels and the United Tribunes met right in the heart of Leipzig, and it wasn't long before the two sides were at each other's throats. The Tribunes went straight for the Angels, attacking without warning. The Hells Angels were quick to fight back. One of them pulled out a gun and fired, hitting a young man from the United Tribunes. The young man, Vassal A, was left fighting for his life, only to later die from his injuries. To make matters worse, one of the Angels kicked him while he was down, even with police already on the scene. The aftermath was intense. The United Tribunes weren't backing down. In the world of gangs, respect is everything, and they made sure their fallen comrade became a symbol of their resistance. The Hells Angels don't take kindly to anyone trying to move in on their territory. They've always controlled everything from the underground drug trade to weapons deals, and they have a stronghold on the protection racket. They don't share. What followed was a series of turf wars. The Hells Angels, having spent years dominating Germany's criminal activities like drug trade and protection rackets, weren't about to let some upstart group come in and take over. The United Tribunes, on the other hand, were hungry to claim their piece of the pie. Cities like Leipzig and Duisburg became battlegrounds, with both sides vying for control and the violence only escalating. To make matters worse for both sides, the German police ramped up their efforts to bring the groups down. The United Tribunes faced an official ban from the German Interior Ministry in 2022 due to their ties to human trafficking and other violent crimes. The police seized their assets across 9 states, a huge blow to the group. But the Hells Angels weren't immune either. They've faced multiple crackdowns over the years, though their tight-knit structure has allowed them to endure. As it stands now, the Hells Angels still hold a lot of sway in Germany's underworld, but their grip is slipping. Newer groups like the United Tribunes are coming up fast, challenging their supremacy in ways that weren't imaginable a decade ago. But how can we talk about the enemies and wars of Hells Angels and not name the legendary Banditos? The Banditos. Founded in 1966 in a small town called San Leon, Texas, the club was started by a group of Vietnam War vets who had a lot to work through. They weren't looking for trouble, but what they found was a sense of brotherhood, a place to belong. Unfortunately, that sense of unity came at a price, and the Bandidos quickly became known for crime. Their rise wasn't exactly peaceful. The Bandidos didn't just stay in Texas, they spread their influence quickly, with members getting involved in everything from drug running to arms dealing. And of course, it didn't help that the Hells Angels, another massive biker gang, was lurking around. From the very start, there was a battle for territory, power, and control, and as you can imagine, things got ugly fast. By the 1990s, that tension exploded. The Bandidos went through an internal split, which opened the door for the Hells Angels to swoop in. A new faction called the Bandidos Nomads was formed, and the Hells Angels saw an opportunity to recruit from them. That just added fuel to the fire, and before long, the Bandidos and Hells Angels were clashing harder than ever. Back in 1996, after a bikers conference in Europe, both Bandidos and Hells Angels members found themselves on the same flights back home. When they landed in Copenhagen, the Hells Angels were waiting for them. 6 of them opened fire in the parking lot. 1 Bandido was killed, and 3 others were injured. Not long after that, the Bandidos made their move. They didn't exactly take the quiet road. Instead, they showed up at a Hells Angels clubhouse in Texas and launched a rocket-propelled grenade. 2 people were killed and nearly 20 others were injured. And yet, even after that, both clubs, realizing the violence was costing them, called a truce for a bit. But peace didn't last long, especially with Jeffrey Pike, a Bandido rising in the ranks. Pike wasn't a fan of the truce. When he took over as president in 2006, the conflict reignited. The 2 gangs didn't just fight over pride. They were battling for control of drugs, territory, and money. And when bikers who the Hells Angels had rejected joined the Bandidos, that didn't help. It only made the rivalry worse. The violence wasn't confined to the US either. In 2006, the war spread to Australia. A group of Bandidos, uninvited, showed up at a Hells Angels clubhouse in Sydney. A violent confrontation broke out, and the Hells Angels retaliated with a car bomb that destroyed one of the Bandidos' clubhouses in Adelaide. That sparked a wave of attacks between the 2 clubs across Australia. The violence, the bloodshed, it went on for months. But through all the chaos, the Bandidos have stayed strong, with chapters popping up in 22 countries. They've even been ranked as one of the largest and most dangerous outlaw clubs in the world, second only to the Hells Angels themselves. These clubs are entrenched in international crime, extortion, murder, trafficking. The FBI and other law enforcement agencies aren't exactly fans of either group, considering the long list of crimes they've been involved in.